From the video studio of the Oklahoman, I'm Ben Felder. It's Thursday afternoon, and earlier today, Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report into the presidency of Donald Trump, his relation during the campaign with Russia, and his maybe attempts to stymie the investigation, was released with some redactions. And so the political world is reacting to that. And joining me today to discuss this is Jessica Wehrman, who is the Washington correspondent for the Columbus Dispatch and other newspaper properties in Ohio. And Jessica, thanks so much for your time. How are you today?
I'm pretty busy, but I'm doing okay. It's been a exciting day for me.
Yeah, a very busy day in the world of politics as the country kind of absorbs this report, and political reporters like yourself are pouring over it. Now, give us a little bit of insight on kind of the work you've been doing. I mean, mainly your day today is just kind of reading through this nearly 500-page report, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the beginning of the day was watching, obviously, Attorney General William Barr give his press conference on it, and then just basically kind of waiting for the 11 a.m. Eastern Time release of the report. It was about a little over 450 pages, spread into two volumes. My job was to look at one of the two volumes, and then my colleague Jack Torrey looked at the other one. And so we've just been basically kind of sifting through it all day, getting as much reaction as we can, with the knowledge that many of the people that are reacting are doing what we're doing, which is trying to basically absorb the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure anybody realistically thought that the release of this report would bring any definitive conclusions. We've seen Republicans and supporters of the president say that this is a win for him. Democrats have said it's raised a lot of concerns. I know here in Oklahoma, one of our senators, Jim Inhofe, has called it just a bunch of nothing. So the reactions kind of are along the partisan lines as you would expect. But there are some really interesting pieces of information in this. You talked about how you're focusing on that second volume. What is the focus of that second volume, and kind of what are some of your big takeaways so far in reading through that portion of the report?
What was interesting is the second volume basically relates to President Trump himself. The first volume relates to what Russia did during the 2016 campaign. And the next one sort of looks at whether or not President Trump attempted to thwart the investigation or whether or not he should be recommended for any charges. It does not conclude that he should be recommended for charges, but very notably, it also doesn't really absolve him of anything. I mean, it really neither confirms nor denies, so to speak, whether or not he did anything criminal. It does sort of indicate, based on the evidence, that he definitely, and this is pretty public based on reporting, fought the investigation, by hook and by crook. I mean, at some points, he would recommend, for example, the firing of then Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who recused himself. When Special Counsel Robert Mueller was appointed, he tried to get Robert Mueller dismissed. One of the more interesting takeaways was the fact that he would kind of give orders, fire so-and-so or fire so-and-so, and his staff basically kind of thwarted him. And that probably kind of kept him out of trouble in a way. For example, when he tried to fire Robert Mueller, his staff basically just never really carried through with that decision, or they talked him out of it. In many ways, his staff probably kept him from facing serious charges because they said, nope, this is illegal. At one point, his attorney, Don McCann, basically, he was being urged to fire someone. He said, this is like a Saturday Night Massacre. I'm not going to do it. The other notable takeaway that I found was interesting was, I think a lot of times the report sort of indicates that President Trump sort of thought maybe that he could kind of get out of this whole investigation by firing people. For example, his decision to fire FBI Director James Comey in 2017. Afterwards, basically the very next day, it was reported in the newspapers, and then it was also reported in the special counsel report that he told the Russian foreign ambassador, well, now this is over because I've gotten rid of Comey, who he called a real nut job. He also said the same thing to Chris Christie after he fired Michael Flynn, who Michael Flynn, as you may recall, was sort of accused of lying about his conversations with the Russians. And afterwards, he told Chris Christie, well, that's over with. And Chris Christie said, I'm not so sure about that. And in fact, that was at the very beginning of this whole escapade.
Yeah. Ever since, right before his presidency, when the accusations of collusion began, President Trump had denied that he had any involvement and is pointing to this report that there is no evidence of that. But as you kind of outlined, there there was obviously concern among the White House and among the president. And there are some issues, or some parts of the report that show, that he thought this might be the end of his presidency.
It was. Yes, he expressed that in very clear and very vivid language, which I will not. I don't know if this is a family broadcast, so I'll keep the language clean. What was interesting was the report did notably say that they don't really have any evidence that he himself colluded. Now, or his staff for that matter. But what seemed to be kind of a pressing concern on his part and may sort of explain his actions was the fact that he really was very, very concerned about the legitimacy of his presidency. Mm-hmm. For example, he was very concerned about the fact that maybe the Russian government may have been the reason he won the presidency. And so he was fighting that. The report makes it very clear that he was fighting that idea that, he was not a legitimate president. And this really bothered him. And Sean Spicer, Hope Hicks, who are communications aides, basically testified as such. And you really get that sense as you kind of sort through that he was very worried about the perception of him and the degree to which people sort of, understood that he was in charge.
Yeah. Well, once again, the president and his supporters are saying, hey, there's no evidence of any illegal activity here, that this is now should be behind us. Democrats are, saying, hey, not so fast. There's a lot of things that we want to continue to look into. So the question is, where do we, go from here, do you think? Well,
I think that sort of, the path has already been paved, regardless of what this report says. And in fact, it does not recommend any sort of criminal charges, but keep in mind that the Office of Legal Counsel has sort of indicated you can't indict or press charges against a sitting president, that you can obviously pursue it afterwards. It's all in the House and the Senate. And the House, as you know, is Democratic majority, and I think what you can expect is investigations to continue, much to the dismay of Republicans. The Senate will be a little bit more challenging for those who are critical of President Trump, because that is a Republican Senate, and they're going to probably argue that this is done. This is over with. The report is the report, and we should all just move on with our lives. So anyone who expected this report to sort of seal things and sort of heal a divided country is probably thinking pretty wishfully.
Yeah, if anything, it seems to maybe just kind of put more fuel on the fire with the partisan debate over this issue that we've seen over the last couple of years. So, well, Jessica, thanks so much for your time. We'll let you get back to reading the rest of the report. A busy day for you. We appreciate you sharing some of your thoughts and your findings from the report. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Take care.